sending the message in Slack, and now I just wait for it to show up on my phone. Okay, supposedly I'm live. I see a little indicator. There we go. Say hi when you join the chat. Oh, that is awesome. Oh, look at that. Tonight's live stream is brought to you by Apple Arcade. Advertising on Twitch. That is pretty sweet. I'll need to check that out, everyone. All right, and we're live, everyone. I know at least a few people were hoping to make tonight's live stream, so if you're joining late, make sure you say hi when you join the Slack chat or the Twitch chat room. And tonight is actually the longest live stream of the entire semester from what I recall last semester. I tried to prepare us for this last week by going over the Bootstrap display utilities for laying things out and for making content appear and disappear at different screen sizes. I'm hoping that will allow tonight to be shorter. I'm aiming for 30 to 40 minutes. I'll try not to go over the hour at the very maximum. The chapter that was assigned this week, I'm not going to talk about too much. Tonight I might make reference to it as we talk about virtual machines, because we're going to be working on the command line quite a bit tonight. And a lot of the tools that our author focused on were tools that you'd probably execute or start from the command line. I believe one of the most exciting ones that she referenced were some of the CSS post processors. They basically allow you to write CSS in some shortcut ways, and then you run a process, and it will do things like shrink the CSS file by removing all the white space, or maybe adding additional CSS to support older browsers, or substitute variables, or even on the extreme now, which we use at the Mid-Michigan college website just last year, the front page of the Mid website actually has one CSS file, and it only contains the CSS that is actually used on the web page. There are a lot of classes that come with Bootstrap, for instance, that I'm never going to use, and so we've built up a lot of those over the years, and rather than have to search to find what is being used, we run a special post step when we're building the website that will actually make a single CSS file that contains just the CSS classes and IDs and everything that's actually being used on the website, and it deletes everything else. It really allows that CSS file that gets sent to browsers to be really, really small and condensed, which is just awesome. So that's the excitement of those command line tools that our author introduces to you. There is a worksheet that you'll be filling out in Moodle related to that. But my goal tonight is to introduce you to the concept of working with Linux and working with virtual machines and working on the command line. No small task either. So what I envision is going to happen is I will be demoing something. I'll be following an outline that I have a link available to in Moodle. In fact, let me click over to it right now. It's called the VirtualBox plus Ubuntu Instructor Outline. This is everything that we're going to do tonight, or that I'll show you tonight. And it also has some advanced commands that we will use in future weeks. But I've tried to put it all here. Technology adapts so fast that this is actually the very first time that I've ever been able to teach this class with the exact same version of Linux from year to year. So the version of Linux that we're going to use tonight is made by Ubuntu, and it's version 18.04. The 18 comes from the year that it was released. So this version of Ubuntu originally came out in 2018, and it came out in April. So it is labeled 2018-04. And if you take a look at what I listed in Moodle, when we recorded this live stream on, what is it, September 24th, 2019, we're actually installing the 3rd revision of this version of Ubuntu. When I teach this class next year, I'm probably going to have to increment that to 20, because we'll be in 2020, believe it or not. These versions of Ubuntu, although there are other ones, like there's probably a 1903 or a 1904 available now, though I try to stick on these even year ones, because when they release something like 1804, they promise that it will be supported for 5 years. So when I was on the technology team at Mid, we wanted to run oh goodness, why do I have do not disturb mode off on this computer? There we go. All right. We tried to install operating systems that would last for a long time at Mid. So we'd at least get 5 years of updates on that server before we would either upgrade it to a newer version of the OS or replace it entirely with a new version of Linux. So that's why I am following these directions. These directions actually are modeled off of work that my team used to do quite frequently at Mid. I've installed Ubuntu myself more times than I can count. During the semester, I'm forcing you to have practice and rehearsals of installing Ubuntu, because the only way that you will become more comfortable with the command line and more comfortable installing an operating system and using virtual machines is just to be exposed to it and to be forced to go through the motions yourself a few times. So that's the goal tonight. You can sit back and watch tonight. I did ask that you try to install VirtualBox before tonight, but it's okay if you're watching this and you haven't done that yet. You can at least get a feel for what you will be doing on your own. And it's not necessarily on your own. You can play back this video as many times as you want, which is why I'm endeavoring to keep it very short. So I have already installed VirtualBox. It is VirtualBox version 6. When I've taught this class in the past, I think last year was the first year that all of my students had a 64-bit PC, so they were able to all install VirtualBox 6. If your computer is older and only supports 32-bit, there are versions of VirtualBox that you could download for that. You just have to go to a different download page, and there are also different versions of Ubuntu that you would be downloading as well. Contact me if you need that, but since we didn't need it last year, I'm hoping we won't need it this year. So like I was saying, I have already pre-worked on a few things. In fact, what I am going to be working on tonight isn't even on this computer that I'm sitting at right now. I found out the hard way that if I try to run too many things on my computer while I'm live streaming, that the video and the audio starts getting out of sync. So what is happening tonight is I am remote controlling. This window right here is actually not my computer. It's the laptop that is, let me get out of the way. It is located right there. We're going to be looking at that computer through the magic of remote desktop here. I'm controlling it. It's going to be running VirtualBox. What VirtualBox is software that allows you to virtualize or run multiple copies of an operating system all on one computer. So our computers are so powerful now that and they're fast enough that they can actually handle scheduling tasks and processes to run so quickly that you don't notice multiple versions of that computer or that operating system running on that computer at once. And VirtualBox is a free program produced by Oracle that allows you to create just small little virtual machines, they're called. They're like little computers running their own sandboxed OS that you can allocate how much of your computer's resources you want to give to it, both in terms of how much storage space to give it and how much memory it's allowed to consume. And they are completely sandboxed. That's the key point here. I would not want you to take my class and install Linux over top of the computer that you do homework on. So rather than installing Ubuntu over top of what you're using right now, we are going to download VirtualBox in this class, create a virtual machine, and install Linux into it. So it is not going to impact your computer. It's going to keep it completely safe, and everything that you will be creating you can delete when you're done, and your computer will go back to exactly the way it was before. I am obviously using a Mac. VirtualBox will run on Mac OS, it'll run on Linux, it'll run on Windows. I think the user interface is pretty similar between the Mac and Windows, but if there are discrepancies, I'd be happy to send screenshots from a PC later on. But I hope this video will help everyone who's in the class follow along. So let's create our first VM. Oh, I gotta turn down the volume there. I heard myself talking. It was very odd there. Okay, so I have VirtualBox. I'm going to close that tab. The next thing that you will need to download is the operating system installer. Back in the day, when we wanted to install Linux on our servers at work, we would actually have to put it on a CD. So we would actually download one of these installer images, which are called ISOs, and then we'd use a program to take that ISO, expand it, and burn it onto a disk. A lot of computers, laptops, desktops, and especially servers these days don't come with a CD drive, and that's okay. We have USB thumb drives. So there are programs now that allow you to take an ISO that you download and expand it onto a USB drive, so you can just plug it in your computer, and when it boots, it will be running that software. Tonight, though, we're just going to download the ISO, and like I said, I've already done this. I downloaded the server install image that I linked to in Moodle. Like I said, it's 64-bit, and if you scroll down the page, it is actually the equivalent of this file. Where'd it go? Ubuntu 1804.3 live server, and it's the 64-bit ISO. It is 848 megabytes, which I think is actually too big for a CD these days. This is the server install image. This is the one that you'll want to download. It will take a while to download. It's quite big. The link up here on the page will work just as well for downloading it. I've had students think that they would use the desktop version of Ubuntu, and although you could probably download that and you would get a GUI, I'm really, one, trying to save space, but two, trying to give everyone the chance to work with a command line only interface. There's not going to be a mouse that we can use inside of this operating system. We're just going to be typing commands tonight, and I promise you that I'll have a list of all the commands you need in the cheat sheet tonight. So get that downloading if you haven't already, and pull up the Google Doc outline here so that we can begin. Let's see, let me switch over to my computer in the background over there. So let's start just by creating a new virtual machine. Why is it asking me? Well, let me make sure I've got the right version of VirtualBox installed. I'm going to go up to the VirtualBox menu and go to About. You'll see that I'm running version 6.0, the latest version, and I want to click the New button, not the Add button. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is give our virtual machine a name. I'm going to call it Ubuntu because it is the Ubuntu server that we're going to be installing. And as soon as you type in the word Ubuntu, VirtualBox is smart enough to realize and choose automatically that you're going to be setting up a Linux VM, and it even automatically chooses Ubuntu. What this does in the background is select some default settings that are great for virtualizing and running Ubuntu. I'm going to click Continue to go with the defaults. And on a lot of these screens, I am just going to use the defaults. It's going to ask how much memory on your computer do you want to allow the virtual machine to use. You wouldn't want to give all of your memory to it because then the rest of what you're running is going to go slower. Because what we're just doing is running a very basic version of Ubuntu, and at most it's going to be running a web server to host our websites. We don't need a lot of memory. In fact, I think mine defaulted to using 1 gigabyte or 1,024 megabytes. That is perfectly fine. So I will click Continue. Next, it's going to ask how you want the storage to work. And I talked about how we get to choose how much space it uses. In this case, we're going to say up to how much of my hard drive am I willing to allow it to use. Hopefully you have 10 gigabytes available, but the good news is even if you don't have 10 gigabytes, it is not going to use all 10 gigabytes up front. I'm going to click Create the Virtual Disk Now, and I'm going to leave it at the default hard disk file type of VirtualBox disk image. And when I'm on this screen here, it's asking, do you want to allocate a fixed hard disk file where it uses all 10 gigabytes right now, this very moment, or do you want to start small and have it grow up to 10 gigabytes once it needs more space? And for a laptop or a computer like this, it is better for me to use the dynamically allocated. size because I don't have to give all that space up front. On our servers that we were running at mid, though, we actually purposely would choose fixed sizes so that we wouldn't accidentally set up, like 100 servers, and at some point when they start using the space, they run out. That would have been a nightmare. Trust me, I know. So we're going to go with dynamically allocated for now. Here's where we get one more opportunity to change the name of the file that it's going to be creating or how much space it can grow to. I'm leaving it at those settings. And just like that, we created a virtual machine. It's not running yet, but all the configuration is there. And there's just one more step that I want everyone to try to do ahead of time, and that's change some information about the network configuration. So if you right-click or control-click or even click this yellow settings button on the virtual machine, we need to go to the network area. And by default, when we're creating these VMs in VirtualBox, I told you it's creating a sandbox environment. It even creates a separate network that only these virtual machines get to see. They can still get out to your internet connection, but the problem is that all the devices on our network, including our computer, won't be able to communicate with this virtual machine with this default network adapter that's set to NAT. Instead, we want to change that to bridged adapter. And when you choose bridged adapter, it's actually going to ask you which network connection do you want it to share. The bridged adapter does something really cool. It takes your network connection. So if you're connected over Wi-Fi or plugged into your router, instead of just one IP address being assigned to this computer, what your router that's giving your internet is going to see are actually two devices running on the exact same machine. So it's going to give you at least two separate IP addresses, one for your regular computer that you're using right now, and one for the VM. And if you had multiple VMs using the bridged adapter, they would each get their own real IP address on your network. That's going to be important for us because we want to be able to type in our IP address of the VM and see our website. That's ultimately where we're taking this part of our project in the next couple weeks. So make sure you choose bridged adapter. If not, you'll run into troubles later on in this assignment. So I'm going to choose bridged adapter. And that's all I have to do in VirtualBox. The next step is just to click Start. And it's essentially like we hit the power button on a computer. You'll see that there is no operating system installed yet. It's just like a blank disk. It's like we bought a hard drive, bought a brand new computer, put the hard drive in the computer, and hit power. No Windows is installed, no Mac OS, no Linux. That's what we're going to do next. And this is where the ISO image comes into play. So we can use the Browse button here. And hopefully you'll be able to find it in your downloads. Here's that Ubuntu 1804 live server ISO image that I downloaded earlier. It's 890 megabytes. I'm going to select that, and I will click Start. So this is essentially like putting a CD or a USB thumb disk into a server and powering it on. Only we're just connecting the virtual machine to that ISO file. And while this is starting, you see it starts really tiny here. I got to find a way. I did it last semester to scale this up. Here we go. Let me know if that's easier to see in the chat room if you can. You'll see a lot of text flowing by. I'm going to close these little pop-ups that appeared on top. You'll notice that my mouse cursor disappears when it's inside of this window. That's because there is no mouse, no GUI, graphical user interface running. This is actually just a text-based interface. And they've tried to make it look prettier than it has in the past. It's got color now. It's got orange and green highlighting. This used to be completely devoid of color not too many years ago. But this is where the outline and the cheat sheet of my notes is going to be very helpful. I have a section labeled Useful Command Line Keyboard Buttons. When you don't have a mouse, you have to have an alternative way to move around the interface. So the key buttons you're going to have to remember on your keyboard are the space bar, which is great for selecting. If there is a checkbox that you want to select, the easiest thing to do is to move to it and then hit the space to check it. I know a lot of you will probably want to hit the enter button, and that works generally too, but enter also usually says that I'm done and move you to the next screen. So it's safer for you to use the space bar to make your selections. The tab key is something we're probably all very familiar with from web forms. That lets you move from field to field, and so there will be times where I will tab between parts of the interface. The arrow keys are great too. In fact, on this very top screen where we're choosing the keyboard, one of my options is to use the up and down arrow keys to choose my preferred language. Escape is worth mentioning. It allows you usually to go back to the previous screen. So let me try to demonstrate that. I'm going to choose English, and then I'm going to hit escape, and that took me back to the language selection. So that's good. And like I said, enter usually allows me to move on. So when I'm on this screen, I'm going to hit enter on English. The next screen is asking me what keyboard layout do I want to use. It defaults to English, so let's hit enter. And this screen, let me see if my notes are updated. Yeah, on the network screen, hopefully it will show an IP address similar to your computer's. If I open up my network settings on this laptop, my computer has an IP address on the Wi-Fi network of 192.168.7.97. If I bump over to this VM, it received an IP address from my network. And the reason I know it's the same is because it starts with 192.168.7. So it's on the same network. It got a different IP address of 108. That looks good so far. So I think this means we'll be able to connect to the internet, and we'll be able to connect to the VM from our other computers. So I'm going to hit enter on this screen. The next screen talks about proxy settings. And this is where I can share a little bit of my background. When I worked at another university, a lot of our servers, in order for security, weren't allowed to have an internet connection. So they couldn't actually go download anything from like Microsoft.com or check people's email. You had to specify a proxy address, and only certain traffic was allowed through. We don't have to do anything nearly as complicated with our VM. We just can let it get out to the internet. So I'm going to hit enter here. This screen says configure Ubuntu archive mirror. This is the URL that Ubuntu is going to use to download software updates and packages that we're going to be using in just a couple minutes here. So I'm going to hit enter on this screen as well. Now we are on the file system setup screen, and this is where I'll caution you again that we are not erasing anything on your computer because it's running in a virtual machine in VirtualBox. It cannot destroy any of your other files. If you were booted up off of CD or thumb drive, then you'd have to worry about whether you were allowing Ubuntu to use the entire hard drive or not. But because this is in the safe confines of our virtual machine, we can say, yeah, go ahead, use the entire disk. I'll hit enter. And it's going to ask you how you want to split up that space. What partitions do you want to use? And this is outside the scope of our class, but if you are a CIS student and you take one of our operating system classes, they will for sure talk about partitioning the drive, creating multiple volumes. Like you've had the C drive on your computer. You've probably seen other network drives or D drives or other partitions created. Ubuntu allows you to do that too, so that you could dedicate a portion of your hard drive for swap space, for memory, or for if you wanted to create a separate volume to host all of your websites, you could do that as well. We're going to keep it basic. This is another screen where I'm just going to hit enter. And it's going to summarize that it's going to use up all 10 gigs of space and create a new partition. And I'm going to hit enter. It asks for confirmation because remember, this could be dangerous if you were doing it on your own computer and not in a virtual machine. So this is where you're going to have to use the arrow key to move down to continue. And it's highlighted in red because this is potentially going to erase a hard disk from its perspective. It won't though because it's in a VM, so I'm going to hit enter. And this is probably the most typing that we're going to have to do in the whole installation. This is for creating an account for you on the Linux machine that you're setting up. You're used to using accounts for logging in because you have an account that you log into Moodle with. If you visited any computer lab on the mid campus, you have logged in with your username and password there. We're basically creating our own server with its own usernames and passwords. It asks you what your real name is, so I'm going to type Brandon Kish. I will hit tab, and you'll see that text box turns gray because I've selected it. Now we need to give our computer a name. It can't have any spaces, but you can get creative. At mid, we actually had an old naming scheme based on photographs that were hanging up in Harrison. Now, with the construction going on up there, none of these photos are hanging up anymore, but hopefully someday they will again. And there's a photo of a man from the local area up north who actually had bears on his property, and his name was Spikehorn. So we had one server called Spikehorn, we had another server called the Bear. Crazy cool pattern. You can call this server whatever you want. I'm going to call mine something pretty funny. I'm going to call it Kish Ubuntu. It's creative, right? Then I'm going to tab and enter a username. For this, I think I even wrote in my outline that I recommend. I guess I didn't write it in the outline. I'll tell you this by video. I recommend using your normal username from mid. I've had students create a username that they thought they would remember and then they've forgotten. So keep it simple. I'm just going to make mine bkish because that's my mid username. Hit tab, and now I have to type my password in twice. This password can be whatever you want. I find myself copying and pasting into my server all the time when I'm teaching this class, so I don't use my normal password because I don't want to accidentally film it on screen. And I would actually recommend that maybe you pick something that's not your normal secure password, but is something easier to remember. This is like the only time you'll ever hear me give advice like that about passwords. But I'm just going to make mine something that I'm going to remember today. It has to match. I'll hit enter, and it looks like they did match. This screen is also important here. Make sure you remember your password. It looks like my notes don't have this because Ubuntu has changed slightly. Make sure you select the Open SSH server package on, what step is this? It doesn't even have a step. Oh no, it's step 7. Step 7. So we are going to try to remotely control our server. And in order for us to do that, we have to install a special piece of software called SSH or OpenSSH. So what I would like everyone to do is use the spacebar to select that checkbox. And then you can hit tab a couple times to get down to the done button. And as long as you have the OpenSSH server selected, then when this computer boots up, we'll be able to remotely connect to it without having to use VirtualBox. I'll explain more about that in a little bit. So hit done. On this screen, there are pre-configured packages, like if you needed a database server or I think I saw a PowerShell in there. I think I laughed last year because I'd never heard of a Mosquito server, but that's a thing that you can configure pretty quickly. We don't need any of these. As long as we have the OpenSSH package selected, we have everything we need. So I'm going to tab down to done and hit enter. And I want to say that we are pretty much done at this point. Let me turn hiding on here so I can see the full display. Excuse me. So it is done with the installation already. Ooh, this is new in version 0.3. It is actually downloading and installing security updates as part of this process. One of the commands in my document is how to install updates. So it's actually pretty interesting that this is doing it for us already. I like that. The downside is because it's downloading files and installing them that now we get to sit here and stare at our screen a little bit longer than I had hoped. But it looks like we've only been going a half hour, so we are still within the time frame that I was aiming for. Oh, I see a few names in the chat room in Twitch. Feel free to let me know how you think this is going, if you were able to get VirtualBox installed already on your own computer. If I move this a little bit out of the way here, you can watch these little blinking lights down at the bottom here so you can see that the hard drive is being used. Oh, there's even a light on the CD as it reads from our ISO. Okay, so it's kind of cut off on my screen here, but it says, thank you for using Ubuntu, and my option has changed to reboot. So we're going to hit enter on reboot. prompts us to remove our installation medium. Now, back in the old days, when your server had a CD drive, you'd have to hit the button to take the CD out. I am pretty sure, because this little CD icon in the bottom isn't highlighted here, that there is no CD or ISO mounted anymore, so it's safe for us to hit enter. So the computer's rebooting, and with any luck, it won't go back into the installer and will instead boot into our operating system. I hope you see a lot of green OKs. As each part of the operating system starts, it gives you a status of that particular step. And right here I see that it, somewhere in here it started OpenSSH, it looked like, which is good. So let me close that little bubble that popped out. The first time that this server booted up, it added all this extra text on top. I found last year that if I just hit enter, it brought me back to the login screen. With Linux, like I said, there's no mouse, so I can't move my mouse around to select the login screen. I just start typing. So I'm going to type in my username and my password that I had put in. And just like that, I am logged into Ubuntu for the first time. Now at this point, it's not very pretty. The text is very thin. It's not great for the live stream. So what I am actually going to do is hide my remote connection here. So it's like I'm not even at the computer anymore. I have moved away. And for all intents and purposes, it's like this virtual machine that I'm running is up in the cloud. I want to remotely connect to it. And that's why I installed OpenSSH. I had a link in Moodle to a piece of software called Putty. This is a remote shell application that will actually allow us to connect to our virtual machine with SSH. The way that you configure it, when you open up Putty and you try to create a connection, is you'll type in the IP address and the username that you're going to connect with. On the Mac, I don't need to download Putty and install it, but if you're looking for Putty on your computer, you'll probably choose a 64-bit Putty installer file on Windows. If you're on a Mac, you can actually go into the applications folder, go down to the utilities folder, and every Mac now comes with what's called a terminal. And this is like a little command line program or command line interface that ships with the Mac. And I can blow it up here. And I think that this will be an easier way for you to see my commands. Now, SSH is just available as part of the Mac OS. So I will type SSH to use the SSH program. And I want to connect to that cloud, or, that computer right there, as if it's in the cloud. Using my username this is kind of like an email address. I'm using the user at the IP address. And I believe that was 192.168.7. Crud. I should have written that down. Let me go back to my remote control session over here. When the computer booted up, it included information about its IP address. Right here it says IP address for ENP0S3. And it says 192.168.7.108. So I would write that down. If you can't find it and you can log into VirtualBox, you can actually type ifconfig, and that will give you all the IP address information that is available on this VM. I believe that this is in my notes. If I go to the outline here, I say take note of the IP address. You can also look up the IP after logging in with the ifconfig command line program. Okay, so after all that, did I even make note of what it was? 192.168.7.108. Let me update my notes down here. So 7.108. Again, it looks just like an email address. I'm going to hit enter. And the first time that I try connecting to this computer, I will be warned that Brandon Kish on this computer has never actually connected to this server. I don't know what the server is. Do you trust it? I'm going to say yes. I always say yes the first time. But what happens behind the scenes is my computer that I'm using here right now for recording is going to take note of information about this Linux server that I'm connecting to. And if I ever try connecting to it again and it doesn't have the same information that the computer downloaded the first time, it'll pop up a very scary looking warning saying that this server doesn't match what you've connected to before. And ostensibly it's supposed to protect you so that you're aware of if someone changed the server on you without you knowing. So I am going to log in with that password that I had created. Hopefully you still remember it. And I think this looks a lot better. There's actually color here. So you can see all that same information that was displayed when I logged in before, except we now get the superpower of being able to use a mouse to move our cursor and select so that we can copy and paste. On the Mac, I can actually use Command C and Command V to copy and paste. If you're using PuTTY, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Actually, if you click and select, as soon as you let go of the mouse, it has actually already copied. And if you want to paste, you can't use Control C or Control V, but you can right click. And as soon as you right click on PuTTY, it pastes in whatever's in your clipboard. It's a little awkward to get used to, but you warm up to it pretty quickly. It saves you a few keystrokes, not having to use Control C and Control V. It's just selecting and then control clicking or two-finger clicking or right clicking, whatever it is on your computer, to paste in to PuTTY whatever you have on your clipboard. So because of that, I can actually shrink my display and run some of these commands that are showing through from my Google Doc. So this is probably the first time that many of you have used Linux or even a command line program on your own. So I want to just give you a quick tour of some of the commands that are most commonly used in Linux. The first thing that I want to talk about is how you could update your software. Ubuntu comes with some software that allows you to search for programs and install them. It's kind of like an app store, except a command line version of the app store that's really old and predates any app store that has ever existed. It is called apt, A-P-T. I imagine that might mean something or stand for something. Maybe the P means package. Whatever it is, I just know that apt is what I use to install software on Ubuntu. If I want to run it, I can type apt and then a space and any command that I know the apt software will recognize. In this case, it's update. And I'm just going to run apt update, and oh, look at that. I got a permission denied error. Some of these programs that I'm going to run are dangerous, and they install software or they change settings that we wouldn't want just any user on my Linux server to be able to do. This is a server, and we only want certain users to be able to do certain tasks. So in Linux, there's a concept of the super user, and there's a really funny comic that I linked to right down here. XKCD number 149 is called Sandwich, and I think my friend has a t-shirt of this comic. Someone's sitting in a chair and they say, "Make me a sandwich," and someone says, "What? Make it yourself." The person replies, "Sudo make me a sandwich," and the person is forced to say, "Okay." Now it sounds a lot like Simon Says, like the alt text says here, but I like it just because I will often be running commands, and as I'm reading the output of those commands, I'll realize that I didn't use the magic word. I didn't say sudo, as you super user do, apt update. And when I do, it will usually ask me for my password one more time. If I haven't logged in a while, it'll say, "I'm sorry, I need to know exactly who is authorized to install this software." And I'm going to type that password again. And this time the output is a lot different. You'll see that it actually went out and it downloaded information about packages. And it'll even tell me that there are some packages that could be upgraded. And it tells me the command if I want to see what packages are available to be updated. We're not going to take a look at updating software right now because the installer actually did that for us. It was the last step when that was happening. But I wanted you to know how to update software, and we're going to be using apt to install some software a little bit later in the live stream. So let's talk about some commands that you should know how to use. Let me scroll back down here. The first one that I want to talk about is pwd, print working directory. If I type pwd, you'll see that I am in a folder called bkish, and that is located underneath home. This looks a lot like a URL, And instead of having drive letters like in Windows, everything starts with a slash. That is the forward slash. That is actually, I should probably hold it like this. Wow, it's all backwards in my display here. So it's the forward slash. Home is a folder, and then bkish is a folder. Every user that gets created typically gets their own folder to put their junk in. You can move around, kind of like how you were working with referencing CSS or image files that were in a different directory. If I type cd, this allows me to change directories. I'll put a space, and then I'm going to put 2 dots. If you remember from our relative URL discussion in Web 1, that actually means the directory above me. So if I type cd ... you'll see that when I run pwd, I'm now in the /home folder. I'm not in bkish anymore. If I did cd ... one more time, you can probably predict where I'm going to go. I'm in the / folder, the top level folder. And if you're curious what's in this folder, you can type ls, and that will list the files that are in the directory that I'm in right now. There's really this like mental memory or mental model that you have to develop in your mind of where you're at any given time when you're in a command line program. Because if you run a program in one folder, it could affect things differently than if you ran it in a completely different folder, as you'll see in just a minute. So ls shows you the contents of the folder that you're in. If you are lost now and you just want to go back home to your files because you're scared and you don't want to edit any of these files that are being listed here, you can use cd to do that. I used to think that you had to type cd and then the tilde after a space to get to your home folder, because tilde usually means your home folder. But I read in our chapter from our author, and I've been using computers for longer than I care to admit, and I didn't know this. If you just type cd, it automatically goes back to your home folder. And you can tell that because it has this little tilde here in purple. But if I type pwd, you'll see that I'm actually in /home/bkish again. When you log in with SSH or into Linux, you typically get taken to your home folder to start out with. All right, so we kind of know how to navigate around some folders here. There is another way to run ls with a few extra flags, they're called, and I think our textbook author talked about that. If I pass the dash, I can pass in these options like la, which I like to think of as list and all. So this is actually going to change that format. Instead of listing them in columns like one folder name at a time, it lists a little bit more information about each item line by line here, and it shows way more with the A. It actually shows all these files that start with a period. If I just run ls without any of those flags, it actually doesn't show anything in my home directory because everything that's in there right now starts with this period. Those are hidden files. So there's a file that shows that I have successfully run sudo before. There's a file that has some of my preferences in it, that has a cache in it, a script that runs when I log out and when I log in. All of these are hidden from display because they're just like settings that I generally don't want to see. But let's make another file that's going to hang out in there. I'm going to use the command called touch. Actually, before that, let's make a folder, mkdir. And let's make a folder called my folder. So makedir is how I pronounce that, space in my folder. When I hit enter, it returns back really quickly, but if I hit ls, you'll see that now I have my folder in there. I could go into my folder with cd. So cd, and I'm going to hit my and hit the tab key. And just like in Visual Studio Code and in Atom, the command line tries to make your life easier and provide auto-completion. So you can type generally a few characters of either a file name, a folder name, or of a program, and it's going to auto-complete as much of it as it can. If there are 2 things that are called my folder, it's generally going to autocomplete as much of that as it can and then wait for you to type in another character, and then you can hit tab to finish the rest. And I'll show you a few examples of that, I think, later in the semester. But autocomplete is nice, so now I'm in my folder called my folder. And if I wanted to, since there's nothing in there right now according to ls, I can actually use a command touch to create files or to update their last modified date. So I'm going to type touch, and then let's just create an index.html. If I type ls, you'll see that there is a file named index.html in there. And if I wanted to put text in there, that's a little bit trickier. I have to use a different program. I used to work with some people that loved a text editor called Vim. It's a lot like how there's different text editors that we used in web design already, like Atom and Visual Studio and Notepad. The one that I would like you all to use, because I think it's easier on the command line, is called nano. So I'm going to run nano index.html, and that's going to open up a text editor. It's pretty bare bones. There's nothing in the file, but I can start typing. So I'm going to just make a simple H1. I know I'm forgetting all the opening tags, but this will work for our needs. And I'm going to say hello world. End my tag. Now, it's got some fancy, this old dog has some fancy tricks. It does do color coding. And if I want to actually do anything with this file, I have to use these shortcuts that are at the bottom of the screen. So this little up arrow, or the caret as I like to call it, is the control key. And then the next character, like O, X, those are the commands that I want to do. So if I wanted to exit, that would be control X. If I wanted to save the file, that's considered writing out. That's control O. There is a way to find and replace with control W and control slash. There's also a way to do copy and paste with control K and control U. When we get to editing bigger files from the command line, there are ways to jump up and down, like a whole page at a time, that I'll cover then. But for now, if I wanted to save this, I'm going to just say control X to exit, and it warns me, hey, do you want to save what you modified? And then you can type Y for yes, and it asks you, where do you want to save this? I'm going to say index.html by hitting N or enter. And now if I ls-la, you'll see that it was modified just a few minutes ago, or a few seconds ago, right here. And if I wanted to see what was in that file without opening up nano, I could just type another program name called cat, not dog, cat. I don't know what cat stands for, but it prints out whatever's in the file. So I'm going to type cat index.html, and right there is the contents of that file that we created. And if you wanted to learn more about these tools, you could run another program called man for manual, and you could read about what the touch command lets you do. You can use the arrow key up and down to read more information about it. You could also Google any of these commands. If you get stuck on any of these, I generally will search for Ubuntu and then the name of the command I'm trying to run. And that will lead me to infinite resources and other people who have run into problems with the tools that we're using. If you want to get out of the manual program, you hit Q. You know, I bet you can also hit escape. Let's try that. I'm going to hit escape. Oh, escape leaves me in there. Look at that. So you do have to hit Q to quit. So I think that's enough of an introduction to some simple commands that you're going to use quite a bit. At this point, I actually want us to move on to the next link that was here in Moodle. It's a DigitalOcean article about how to install Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. We're going to be installing a lot of these things in the weeks to come, but the one thing I want to install tonight is Apache. I want us to actually be able to go to this IP address for the server that we created. I believe I wrote it down here. This 192.168.7.108. That IP address will be different on your network. But if I type that into Chrome on my computer, you'll see that it's not running anything right now. So what I would like to do before we end tonight is install Apache, a web server. So this is our chance to actually install a package like I talked about earlier today. And before we install Apache, let's practice with another program called Lynx. Lynx is actually a text-only browser. So it's like the equivalent of Chrome, but without all the pretty web pages that you're used to. So if I wanted to install Lynx, sudo is required to install software. And apt is the program that we're going to use. And the command we're sending to apt is install. And then I'm going to add a space and type lynx. That's the name of the program I want to install. It's going to go out and look for information about that program, and the information that it grabs includes all the things that are required to run Lynx. So you'll see that it actually has to install more than just Lynx. It has to also install something called Lynx Common, and it summarizes how much it's going to have to download. It's not that big. It really isn't. So I'm just going to type in Y for yes, and it's going to download those files, install everything required for Lynx to work, and when it returns me back to the command prompt, I can now type ly, and I can hit tab to autocomplete. I have Lynx available to me. And the thing that you can send to links is the URL that you want to go to. So I'm going to go to midmich.edu, and it opens up the browser. And welcome to the Mid-Michigan College website. You'll see that it tells you that the site works best with JavaScript enabled. But if you use the arrow keys, you can actually see the nav bar that displays up at the very top on mobile. So there's a link to skip to the main content. There's a link to our portal, My Mid, the directory, jobs. And if you scroll down, there's a button to toggle a menu for the current students, employees. This is actually our mobile-first design. So if I go to midmich.edu in Chrome and I open the web inspector, you are seeing these links right here. Resources, directory, My Mid. So if I hit tab here, come on, computer, tab, you'll see that skip to main content shows up. And then I can tab through these links. Resources for brings up that menu that we're seeing in text here. You'll actually see the logo here. It says Mid-Michigan College logo. That's the alt text for the M logo. And then there's a button to toggle the search form. And actually, eventually here, you'll see a couple links, and then you'll see these underlines. That's actually text to actually type into the search box to do a search. I can tab through some more of these. Right here is the actual nav bar with all the links for the admissions area. There's a photo and alt text here of students listening, a student listening on campus. This is the entire website. Some of these colors mean that things are links. It's actually pretty remarkable that you can still browse the web like this today. And actually, I like to browse a website that I've been working on like this with something like links, because when you don't see any of the images, you can actually tell if the alt text is missing pretty easily. So you could hit enter on any one of these to navigate to the next page. Once you're done playing around with links, you can actually use Q to quit. It'll ask you, are you sure you want to quit? And you can say yes, and you're back at the command line. So just like that, we've installed our first piece of software in Linux, in Ubuntu. That is worth celebrating, because now we're going to install Apache. And this article is the beginning of a few articles that we'll be using from DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean is actually a web host. So from DigitalOcean, you can purchase a virtual machine that runs in the cloud. And when you sign up and you pay, it's really just like a couple bucks a month. I think for $5 a month, you can get a virtual machine. They will pre-install Ubuntu for you, and then you can install whatever software you want, like a web server, which is what this article is about. So the benefit of these DigitalOcean articles is they have summarized the most common ways to install the software that you need to host a website. The most popular, I think it's the most popular. I should be careful saying that. I'm pretty sure Apache, let's see, is Apache the most popular web server? Google says that Apache powers 52% of all websites. So I think that is true. It is the most popular. There's not enough left for someone else to be bigger than them. So Apache is software that will take files like index.html, all your CSS and images, and send them to a browser that requests them. That's what Apache does. We are going to set up Apache, and in future weeks, we're going to finish out the rest of the LAMP stack. We've installed Linux today, so we got the L. We got the A today with Apache, and then in just like a week or two, we'll talk about MySQL and PHP. So today, and in this live stream, you're going to be only doing step 1 in this article. And what I love about the DigitalOcean articles is how they're formatted. They have a couple paragraphs of text. They'll tell you what command to run, and then they'll actually show you in these code tags or in the pre-tags the sample code that you need to run. And you can actually just select the text to copy and paste. So the first thing that they tell you to do is update the list of packages that are available with sudo apt update. We did that earlier, so this should go really fast. And then they want us to install with sudo apt install Apache 2. And if you're on PuTTY, you can copy with Control-C, and then you just right-click to paste into PuTTY. I'm going to use Command-V on my Mac to do the pasting. And it tells me, okay, if you want to run Apache, you need to run all this other software too. So it prompts me, do you want to install all of this? And I'm going to say yes. Gives me a nice progress bar. And actually, even though there's a little bit more for adjusting a firewall, what I've found so far is that Ubuntu doesn't install the firewall by default, or doesn't enable the firewall by default. So actually, as soon as this command is done, As soon as Apache's running, which I think it is now over here in the background, I can go to a web browser on any computer on my network, even your phone, and you can type in that IP address. And instead of getting that not found page, you're actually going to see the Apache to Ubuntu default page. You're running a web server. Now, this is not a great website. It's the one that comes with Apache. What we want to do next is replace this file, or at least add our own file. And this will tell you that the folder that this file lives in is /var, a folder called var, and then a folder called www, a folder called html, and then right here we should know this. This is index.html. So knowing that, let's go back to let's kind of scroll this up so we can see it. Maybe I should shrink this down. There we go. Okay. So we're in the command line, connected over PuTTY over SSH, and I'm going to use cd to go to /var /w, and I'm just going to hit tab. It auto completes the www. I'm going to type h and hit tab, and it completes the HTML. And now I'm in that folder. I can use ls to see that index.html exists in this folder. And if I wanted to use nano, I could type nano index.html. And this is the web page that we were looking at earlier. So let's say you wanted to change this. You wanted to, maybe change. Let me scroll down pretty far here. Somewhere here there's got to be like a H2 or something. I'm going to hit Control V to page down. There we go. And Control Y to page up. So right here is this span. If I use the web inspector, it looks like this Apache 2 text is in a span. Yep, right here it's in a span tag. I'm going to move my cursor over here and say Brandon's Apache 2 default page. And let's try to write that out with Control O to index.html. I'm going to hit enter. Error, writing index.html, permission denied. Can anyone guess why that happened? I'll give you a hint. It's because we didn't use sudo. We didn't say sudo make me a sandwich. So if I wanted to edit this page, it wasn't created by Brandon Kish. It was created by the system when it installed it. So the permissions on this file don't allow me to edit it. So I'm going to have to exit and not save. And I can show you the permissions with ls-la. It says right now that the root user owns both this file and, in fact, owns this entire directory. So in the outline, I provided a couple commands right here where I went into var www.html. I show a couple commands based on the chown or chown command that will allow me to, one, change the directory. That's what this period is, to be owned by bkish. You would put your username in. And then to actually select star and actually change the permissions on all those files so that I can edit them. So let me run these two commands. So I'm going to run sudo chown bkish period. And if I do an ls-la, you'll see that now bkish owns this folder. I still can't do anything to this index file because it's not owned by me. So I'm going to run sudo chown bkish on star, which represents all the files. And if I ls-la, which, by the way, I can actually just arrow up and down to see my previous commands. That's a nice shortcut. You'll see that now bkish owns the file. That means I could go edit it. So let me nano index.html. I use Control W to search for Apache. I guess that didn't work. I guess I'll just page down with Control V here. Eventually I'll get down to that part of the page. And we're going to say Brandon's Apache. Control O to output. And with a little luck, if I refresh this page, it disappeared. What did I do? I bet if we look at the span, Wow, I really broke it. All I tried to do is edit a span tag. Oh, there it is. It still says span, floating element, Brandon's Apache 2, default page. You know, I wonder if it's just too wide for its container. So we're going to call it Brandon's default page. Output that. Raw, unfiltered, live web design. There we go. It fits with Brandon's default page. So we've edited a file. At this point, you could use Nano to create another file. So I could just create brandon.html. Hi, this is my page. So then if I wanted to go to that IP address /brandon.html, here's that web page that I created. Now, you would never want to type in your web page that you already created for another project back into the command line. That is not what I'm asking you to do. So SSH allows you to remotely send commands. There is another program called SFTP, or another protocol called SFTP, that allows you to send files over the SSH protocol. And you did this in Web 1. You all connected to my web server. Your last challenge coming up here will be to connect to this server that you created and upload one of your projects. So for that, I added a link in this document to a program called CyberDuck. I'm pretty sure we all used this last semester in Web 1. It's a lot like SSH because we're going to provide a username and password to connect to our server. And this will actually allow you to upload files and create folders. And let's see, I'm not going to import anything. I'm going to open a connection. It's important that you choose SFTP for the connection. And in the server, this is where you type in the IP address. So 192.168.7.108. It asks your username and your password. And if you connect, the first time it's going to say, do you want to trust this server? And you can say always. And right here's my folder that I created before. This is actually a look into all the files that we were looking at with the command line. So that means that I can actually go up to slash, I can go down to /var, www, HTML, and here are those files that I was creating from the command line. This also means that I can upload files. So with CyberDuck, it supports drag and drop. So if I go to my desktop, I had created last week a Bootstrap stuff folder, and I had created this grid bootcamp final file with those columns. I'm just going to drag that in to upload it and copy the file name. So now if I go to that IP address / that file name, here's that Bootstrap file that we worked on in the last live stream, uploaded to my website. So this is a preview of what we're going to be doing over the next few weeks. Your challenge in Moodle is going to have you download a pre-existing virtual machine from Microsoft and run it. It's actually really cool. If you need to test your web page against a bunch of different platforms, virtualization and VMs allow you to actually run those on your computer. So if you have a Mac, you can actually run Windows on the Mac at the same time, or run Linux, so that you can test with Internet Explorer or any number of browsers. So that's one of your challenges this week. As we're getting closer to the midterm, which we'll be introducing very, very soon, your midterm is going to have you set up a Linux VM like you did today, turn on a server, upload your project that you're creating for the midterm, and host it yourself. That'll allow you to actually look at it from a phone on your wireless network, and it will allow you to get a feel for what it would be like to take a website that you build for another company or for yourself and host it on the real web, on a virtual machine that's running out in the cloud. But we've done all of that ourselves on our own VM, on our own computer. And I would like to know that it works for everyone, so please contact me in Slack as you're trying this. I am happy to help however you need. I am just past my 1 hour mark, so I'm going to end the live stream tonight. I didn't see any questions in the Twitch chat room currently, so when you watch this video again, as I'm sure you will, contact me in Slack if there's anything that I can do to clarify this. And have a very good night, and I'll see you next time.